Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. Really excited to be joined by Raffaele from Termly. Going to be discussing privacy, compliance, kind of strategies for agencies and businesses, and kind of anything around there. We're going to have a fun time talking about this exciting topic. We're going to wait a few minutes before we jump in and kind of dive into the content today. Raffaele has a presentation that we're going to go through. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of this. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll be sure to address those as they come along. You know, for folks who are calling in, would love to hear where you're calling in from, and where in the world. I'm currently visiting the Duda, Colorado office this week. We have a big sales kickoff event going on. So I'm normally in California, but I'm out here in Colorado right now. And Raffaele, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and
for
give
sure.
an overview of where you are?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. I'm based in Seattle, Washington, in the U.S., and kind of parked up here for quite some time. And this is Termly is a remote company, so we're kind of all spread around the world, but we don't have a location like you do in Colorado and a few other places around the world. But Seattle's great, and it's supposed to snow tomorrow, so we'll see what happens.
Heck yeah, that's always fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Hans. So Raffaele, you guys were actually recently acquired by the one.com group, right? I'm just kind of curious, how's that going, and what does that mean for Termly, and kind of what are the exciting initiatives that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we're all really excited. Just fairly recently, and started January, and Group One is a great organization. We're super excited about it. Really, just about focusing on other markets. There's pretty much our initiatives, trying to offer more feature sets and more things for our customers as compliance continues to be a popular topic. Obviously, we're doing that today. And I think overall super positive. We're really excited to start integrating with their teams and really start focusing on some of the initiatives for 2024.
That's awesome. That's got to be exciting, right? Kind of brand new set of areas to move into, and whole new set of topics. That's cool.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to what we've grown so far, and obviously the Duda integration and everything happened last year, and kind of in midst of all these conversations. So I think this just kind of puts us in a place where we can service not only your customers but everybody around the world a lot better, and that's really what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exciting. Do you I think you guys historically you've been kind of a little more US focused on a lot of these privacy policies. So I imagine you guys have a decent amount of work to really round out more of the European kind of regulation privacy side, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a little bit of both. I mean, we definitely a majority of our customers in the US, and obviously when it comes to privacy, the US is a little bit more behind as far as regulations wise in comparison to say UK. But we have a huge chunk of customer base in the UK. We do have a ton of customers around the world. We have 1 million plus customers that we work with. So I mean, it's a good footprint. I think it does allow ourselves to be able to start looking at more translations, more languages, more feature sets that sort of address the European market a little bit more. But regardless, I guess, of the amount of work, our always focus has been a worldwide approach to privacy, especially with the regulations that come out from country to country.
Yeah. Hey, Alessandro. Glad to see you're calling in from the Bahamas. I'm a little jealous of where you live. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wish I was on a beach somewhere right now. So.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Yeah. No, I'm in the middle of the country, surrounded by
Yeah, well, you're in a good spot. I'm a big Denver Broncos fan, so I like Colorado a lot. So that's good. It's all relative, right? It's all relative.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Trevor, good to see you. Thanks for calling in. From Brazil, that's great. Definitely some privacy regulations going on in Brazil, right? Was it LG? Forgot the exact acronym for it, but
BD, yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Brazil is ahead in that South American market, so it's good to see them starting to put things in place.
Yeah, definitely. So for anyone who's just joined us, we're going to kick off here in just a minute. Again, we do have plenty of time for any questions that you guys have. So if you have any privacy, kind of, legal compliance related, especially if you're, looking to offer this as a tool or a service. And I think one of the things we're going to really cover today is how should agencies be thinking about this, right? Is this something that they should be adding to every package? Is this kind of a requirement now? How should they be advising their clients, in the best way? So, if you have those questions, we're going to be happy to answer them kind of along the way here. And with that, why don't we, let's hand this over to you, Raffaele. You have a presentation, I think about 20, 25 minutes or so.
Yeah.
A little bit of a demo of kind of the Termly integration inside of Duda. And again, we'll have plenty of time for those questions as we go through. So why don't we pull up the presentation and kind of I'll hand it off to you.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just like Russ said, we're going to focus on how we can position privacy, talk a little bit about privacy and what it means. I won't spend too much time on that. I imagine a lot of people here understand the importance of privacy, but I definitely want to give a quick overview so that everybody's on the same page. And then from there, just really, how do we position this? How do we sell it? What are the benefits? Really talk about that. So really welcoming of any questions that you all may have with regards to sort of how it applies to your agency and your particular business. I own my own agency for 18 years with a successful exit in 2018. So I understand where you guys are coming from, not only from a reseller standpoint, but also working with, SMBs and smaller businesses and different verticals across the board. So would love to give some perspective on that too as well with regards to kind of what we're doing here at Termly. All right, let's go ahead here and jump to the next slide. So, I always kind of start out by just kind of talking about, privacy and the importance to an individual versus sort of the responsibility sort of a business or agency takes on. And, we can always associate privacy as something that it's important to us, but, making that leap to sort of have your business or agency or of your company to sort of start to implement privacy practices so that you're protecting your customers sometimes get lost in the mix. And I think that it's important to kind of just take a step back and just understand and realize how much privacy is important to you, and then translate that to how it's important to your customers, because they're individuals too as well. And so, it's no longer a place where your information is sort of safe online. And I think that the value of privacy protection and the perception of that from a customer base is extremely high. It continues to grow. And just again, take that step back and think about how that's important to you, and then you can easily translate that into why it's important to your customers. I have we can share this slide too, but there's a great you guys may have seen this an Apple commercial. They tend to sort of be kind of leaders in sort of the tech space to sort of put the privacy as a forefront. And it's a great commercial. It talks about how this individual's information, unbeknownst to her, is getting auctioned off, location data and information about what they purchase and everything too. So I encourage you guys to search for this commercial. Just search Apple privacy commercial and it pops up. But it's just, again, a great emphasis on exactly why individuals don't necessarily make that leap into what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so when they do realize that their information is getting sold off to the highest bidder or transferred to third-party companies that they're not aware of, then all of a sudden it becomes important. So with that, comes a responsibility on agencies and businesses to be able to provide this to their customers. And that's really what it's about. It's a new concept in some cases, but at the end of the day, it's also an old concept that has been growing since, I would say, really popular since 2015, 2016, when GDPR came out in Europe, and continues to build momentum. And again, we'll talk about a little bit more of why that is. So let's take a step back and just really understand and really quickly talk about, what is the core of privacy online. And it's really about personal information. You'll hear PII a lot, but basically it comes down to different aspects of what personal information is shared online. And so it could be, the traditional phone number and email address and, first and last name that you have some sort of contact form on a website. That's as basic as it gets. But now, because of tracking and cookies and different pixels and different platforms and integrations and all these things too, you start to look at browsing history, location data. You start looking at personal finance information if there's a checkout of some kind. You start looking at tracked activity within apps themselves. So all this information is valuable and gets shared or sold. Those can be interchangeable to different companies and different platforms depending on what you use. And so, it's all encompassing. And there is something called regular PI, and there's also sensitive information like financial, demographic, and ethnic type of information. You can also do biometric information too as well. So, from an SMB standpoint, probably doesn't get that far to the right when you do that. But as an agency and as a person that's working with clients and building, you've moved them into the digital age, right? You've moved them into a space where these technologies are going to be a part of their online presence. And so the next logical step is also to put safeguards to build trust with your customers, and put these sort of options on the website to protect privacy from a customer perspective. So it's kind of linear there, but again, I won't spend too much time talking about sort of what information is collected. You guys all know what information you're collecting online. Even if you don't have a form, there's tracking on a website, with regards to different platforms. So keep that in mind, that there's a lot of things happening in the background that needs to be considered when looking at privacy solutions for digital presence. All right, so let's talk about sort of the regulations around the world really quickly, because it is regulations are growing and privacy is shrinking. Your privacy is shrinking. It's very hard to get a hold of that, right? So, these regulations are being put in place all around the world to be able to protect the consumer, and the emphasis is on businesses to offer and require them to put solutions in place to protect those customers that are visiting the site. So it's no longer in the hands of the consumer essentially to provide or have the liability. It's really on the business. And so that's why this shift of solutions, and obviously why Termly exists at this point, is because we need to provide solutions to businesses to be able to handle these regulations that are coming on board. And these regulations themselves, we're all probably familiar with GDPR in the UK and EU. That continues to evolve. There's the e-privacy directive too as well, that's really tied to consent. Germany and other other countries within Europe are leaders in this space as far as more conservative actions too as well. So even though GDPR is in place, every country can have an individual privacy law that's going to build off of that foundation. And that in the United States is a little bit different. We don't have a federal law right now. There's definitely conversations about it, but every individual state, starting with California, is implementing new practices and new regulations that's going to sort of mimic what GDPR was to Europe, and that continues to grow. We had 12 more states actually pending in 2024. Two laws just passed the bills, and they're going to be active in 2025, which I'm sure we'll see a lot more passed this year too, with active dates in the near future. So this continues to grow. It's going to be I imagine in the U.S. anyways, a national law at some point that's going to be structured in such a way to do that. But regardless, I think one of the ones in Brazil, the customers that's on here, mentioned the regulations in Brazil. So everywhere is going to have some sort of privacy law that's going to protect customers. And so in the end, again, that emphasis lands on businesses to be able to implement solutions to protect privacy or give options to consumers to opt out of privacy. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a second.
I have a quick question while we're on the specific states.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how much each state applies to, like, if I don't do business in Virginia, does this law still apply to me? Or if I don't do business in Colorado, does that still apply to me? Like, do you know how that works? Yeah,
great question. I mean, basically what it comes down to is that if you have one customer, or one visitor, I should say, it's not even a customer that's visiting from that state, that counts towards that person, whether you do business in that state or not, whether you cross countries and do business in UK or not. So, and there's a big topic right now on the Google side for international transfer of data, right? That's a big topic right now that's being discussed in consent mode, and other things that Google is doing to try to work in privacy is part of that international transfer. But from the U.S. standpoint, if you have a visitor that's coming from that state, it's ticking that checkbox that you're servicing that state, whether you have a customer there or not.
So it basically means you have to, right? Like every website's going to give visitor from every state eventually, right? May not be immediate, like it's going to happen.
Yeah, whether you want them or not. It's interesting. I had an agency recently ask us, well, can I just suppress the traffic from that state, so I can avoid this? But that's the wrong approach. It's more about let's actually put privacy practices in place so you can service any and all customers, because you could have a customer that you're only service in Texas and they travel to California and they're visiting your website, and that counts too, right? Now you're alienating your customers, you're making technology a little more complicated. The better place is like put an elegant solution on your site that gives consumers options to opt out of being tracked, and in the end, it's just a different way of sort of working your business within these privacy laws. And you don't really have too much interruption with business at all, because in the end, you actually gain trust from your customers that you have options to respect their privacy. And you'll be surprised how many of your own customers, whether they're out of state, in state, or over countries, that are wanting these solutions. It is the new normal. It is the new normal. People are expecting it. I kind of compare it to like HTTPS, secure sites. At one point it wasn't a requirement, but now it is, especially even from an SEO standpoint. And so now it's like, here's privacy going to be sort of perceived as the same thing. Now it is a requirement and you should be doing it. And so people are seeing that as a new normal. In fact, we've even seen some studies that have shown that when privacy options are not there, that they're less likely to stay on sites because they don't have the option to do so. But great question, Russ. Appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about fines really quickly. You have these regulatory bodies, right? GDPR, CCPA, FTC. That's in the U.S. and all these ones. And you start looking at these like landmark cases, right? Of Facebook, multi-million-dollar privacy obtrusion, and then you have Amazon and a few others. Those are the ones people hear about. But out of all the fines that are issued by these regulatory, 75% of them are over SMBs. And that's really significant to understand, is that, a small business may say, well, they'd never fine me. That's incorrect. In fact, 75% of all fines are from small businesses. And you're talking like, $6,000, $2,300, and they're all tied to not being transparent online of how you collect information. And this is what we'll get into, sort of what these solutions can be for these businesses to really avoid these type of regulatory issues. And but it's all about being proactive, because in the end, it's not just about the fine itself. It's also the legal defending yourself. It's the reputation hit that you potentially get. There's a lot of ramifications that come with it. And really the approach is just be proactive about it. In the end, agencies should be proactive in offering this to their customers so they don't put them in a liability, because the first person they're going to come to is work with the agency. Well, what's going on with my website? Why is this being tracked? Why don't I have protections in place? So on and so forth. So it's really about just making sure that we understand it, we educate ourselves a little bit. That's why I appreciate all you guys attending here today, because you were taking that first step. And then in the end, it's really about, okay, well, how can I then offer this to our clientele so that they don't come across this issue in the future? All right, so let's jump into it. Let's jump into a demo. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, here. Hey, Russ, just confirm on your end that you're seeing my screen. I just want to make sure I don't start beforehand.
Yeah, I'm seeing your Termly window here.
All right, perfect. So, Termly is really focused on user friendliness and trying to make a very complicated industry as simple as possible. That's really our core, and that was our approach for our customers. And we constantly get that feedback. So, really it comes down to like two solutions that are going to be able to set up a business to be protected from these regulatory, ambulance chasers. I'll give you some anecdotal stories here in a bit, but in the end, it's really just setting yourself up to really get to a point where you're compliant and you can kind of rest easy and sort of concentrate on your day-to-day, right, of your business. And so those two solutions are consent, which is, opting in and out of being tracked on a digital platform. And then it's also policies. And Termly provides variations of all these different things within these two buckets that I'll kind of walk you through really quickly. We'll do like a 5 to 10 minute demo at the most here. We can always do a more in-depth one here and give you some resources to go into that. But I want to try to keep it simple for you and straightforward. So, consent management, I'll go ahead and start with. And consent is really about placing a banner on your website that allows individuals to be able to opt in or opt out of being tracked. And the technology behind that is that you're placing Termly within your platform. And at that point, we're looking at all of the tracked cookies and identifying those and being able to suppress the tracking of those cookies or the launching of that script prior to giving to consent. So once they opt into it, then we go ahead and launch the cookies. If they opt out, depending on if it's everything or just maybe certain ones, then we can go ahead and not launch those particular scripts so that we respect the privacy preferences of the individual. And so really the first start is really just to identify what cookies you have on your website. And so we have a scanner that you can input your domain and up to 5 subdomains too as well. So that's included. And at the end of the day, you're just starting a scan, and that scan is going to run in the background and identify every single cookie on your website and list them here into specific categories. These categories are purposely sort of somewhat obvious and generic because we want it to be transparent to the consumer. Some people may not know what types of cookies they are, so we try to categorize them into specific buckets so it's easy to understand when a user is visiting your website. And then from there, we provide information, where the location is, information on the description, if they are advertising, what it's for, analytics. So we have a huge database of cookies that we can categorize them directly. There may be some instances where they're unclassified cookies, and here's just an example. We have a cool interface where you can just go in and add a category to the specific what this is about. Custom platforms, have their own type of tracking and implementation, so we try to continue to expand our database. But in the cases, it's really simple to classify it, putting it into a bucket. And then at that point, you're kind of started with the first step of compliance, which is really just being transparent of what you're tracking and how you're tracking it via cookies. So the next step really after doing that is we generate a cookie policy as soon as the scan is done. And that cookie policy is going to be very unique to you based on the information on your account. Again, some of these things are blank. It's just a demo account. But you'll see here that every single cookie based on the categories are listed with information. That's a regulatory requirement for most of the regulatory bodies to show what it's for, why it is, what's the source. You see analytics in here and a few others that we're all used to seeing. So this cookie policy gets generated automatically, and it's immediately available on your site once you set it up on your website and install Termly. The next step too is the banner itself. The banner is kind of the fun part. This is where you kind of build a specific banner that's branded to the business. Obviously, it can be unique and in a sense to the many different types of clients that you may have and may be servicing. We have different locations of the banner itself. You'll kind of see a preview on the right-hand side. Tooltips, banners, full screen, whatever it is. We tend to see fun fact, we tend to see, things shifting towards kind of a more of a modal type of approach on the top left or bottom left. We have, sometimes space can be an issue, right? You have like accessibility, you have a few other widgets in the bottom right, your chat window. So, we start seeing this kind of bottom left type of approach on our banner right here as an example for full screen. So in the end, you have the flexibility to choose. You have custom themes where you can add specific colors and fonts and everything too as well. So you can have these buttons. The goal is transparency too. Some people try to put like a really light colored button and stuff like that. And we obviously have some warnings within our platform, but we want to have sort of high contrast and give them options and be clear and concise. And make sure that we make you compliant based on the regulatory requirements, because consent is very specific. It says you need to have a button this color and this contrast, and make sure that it's the readability is plain English and not too confusing. And so these things change from country to country and state by state and province by province. So at the end of the day, all these things is what Termly helps you navigate when building your banner and everything too as well. So in addition to that, you can alter the text to some degree depending on what type of content personalization, ads, and also tracking you have. And then in addition, which is really the meat of it, which is the regulatory location. So based on the individual's location, we're able to load the banner in different languages. We're able to change the display of the banner based on the regulatory requirements. And one of the things that I use as an example to kind of understand this is that in the UK, it's an opt-out, which means that, an opt-in. An opt-in is that you will not be tracked unless you physically say, I'm okay with being tracked. So that means all scripts do not run until you get that opt-in approach. And so the banner itself is going to be very different than, say, the US, which is an opt-out, meaning that you are going to be tracked unless you opt out of being tracked. And so that means the banner usually just has one button that says accept, and then instead of decline, you have other options. So all of this stuff is laid out pretty easily. We have a recommended default that always goes to the most stringent regulations. So it makes it really easy for our customers to kind of trust Termly that we're going to provide the best service and make sure we protect you at the same time. So, and again, we have obviously a ton of articles and things for you to read up so that you can do that, and obviously a support staff to help you out as well. So, so at the end of the day, that dynamic and those tabs will continue to grow as regulatory bodies change. A lot of them, map themselves towards GDPR and other like bigger body regulatory laws. And so, in that sense, that if you are GDPR compliant, then you could also be Brazil and a few other countries too that sort of follow that guideline. So, but either way, that's a majority of the work that we do on a regular basis to try to continue to navigate these laws and make sure that our platform reflects that as soon as possible. Okay, so let's talk about policies a little bit. So that's it. I mean, let me actually go really quickly just to the installation of it. I'm sure that will be a question of most people. So, obviously our integration with Duda makes that extremely simple, right, straightforward. You don't really have to sort of grab embed codes. It makes it super easy to be able to do that within the platform. But essentially it is a script that lives on your site. We confirm that it is activated once it's installed. We do have a preference center link, which is the second embed code. That is essentially for a person to be able to change their preference once they've interacted with the banner. Typically that link lives in the footer of websites. That's where it is on Termly. And that's where they can go in and, say, okay, I opted in, but I actually don't want to do any performance cookies or analytics. And then you can hit save. So that's just a good option for us to continue to manage preferences and consent. And those are typically stored about 180 days. And then we go ahead and delete those. Again, obviously, if it's a privacy window or if they clear their cache or anything like that, then that would reset it and they would just see the banner again once they visit your site. Okay, awesome. So let's move on to policies really quickly. Policies are pretty straightforward. So policies is actually kind of the first step for compliance, being able to have a privacy policy, terms and conditions, other policies that may apply like for e-commerce, like shipping and disclaimers and acceptable use and everything too as well. But all these policies are actually just a document that makes you very transparent of how you handle the data, how you work within your website so that your customer has a sort of window into your operations that allows them to understand and ultimately opt into being tracked, at least be comfortable to continue to move forward. And again, a lot of ad platforms and different advertising agencies and everything too as well require privacy policies as part of being able to run ads and do things too as well. So this becomes a huge requirement for most SMBs because they're doing some advertising at some place, one or another. Even some certifications require privacy policies before being approved.
If I understand what you're saying there, that means like to actually advertise with Google or advertise with Facebook, you need to have an active privacy policy for your site that Google can link to or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, ads will start incorporating that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when you sign up and they say you need to insert the link of your privacy policy, whether that's hosted with us or hosted on your website, they require that before you can even place an ad on their site. So and again, we're Google certified CMP partner. We are finishing up version 2.2 of that. We're also IAB TCF certified, which is when you're actually placing ads on a website for advertising distribution. So all of these regulations and everything in sort of the industry standard is something that's a part of Termly. So, being able to have a platform that is incorporating those methodologies with GTM integration, all these different ways to publish the site, all these things make it easier for our customers to be able to do that, obviously including Duda's integration as well. Yep. So, but yeah, it's not just regulatory bodies, it's actually ad platforms and stuff too. And that's something that people will come across, right, but not necessarily know up front. So I appreciate that question, Russ. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so policies themselves, let's just look at a privacy policy. Really simple. We have a builder that walks you through several questions that builds a custom policy. We start asking questions about what type of application you have. Is it a website? Is it a mobile app? We start looking at the website itself. We ask you, what information are you collecting? We start getting into GDPR requirements about, how you're handling that information, who's the point of contact if someone has a question. So all of these things we walk you through. You don't have to second guess it. We have every question that's needed to build a very customized privacy policy. It is no longer okay to copy and paste a policy from somebody else to do that. And funny story, 3 days ago, we had somebody copy our privacy policy and terms and conditions, and they made it public, and it got indexed by Google, and our contact information was on there, and we started getting support questions from their customers because they were calling us. So it still happens. Obviously, we completely discourage you guys from doing that, because again, it should be customized to your own privacy practices and updated on a minimum 6 to 12 months, depending on how often you guys are changing your business practices. And that it makes it, yes, for sure. So, so at the end of the day, walking through this, spending time, privacy policy typically takes about 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how complicated your business practices are. In the end, terms and conditions is a lot shorter form too, as well. Makes it really simple, about 5 to 10 minutes. But again, that time is well suited, offsetting to hire a lawyer that's going to be charging you, $300 an hour to do that. And providing this, in all transparency, we have lawyers that use us a time to generate a policy that is a good starting point for their clients, and they customize it from there. So in the end, we have vetted attorneys across the world that allow us to be able to navigate these privacy laws and change our privacy policy builder to be able to make sure that it is compliant with laws across the world. And then in the end, it is as simple as I mentioned before. I'm not going to edit. So if I go to like a terms and conditions, I can add it to my website with the same type of format. HTML, a code snippet is the embed code that can just essentially do it. Or you can just host it with us, and you can use that link to send it over to Google or any ad platforms too as well. So, but yeah, that's kind of the crux of it. Russ,
Yeah, I have a question related to this.
Yeah.
When setting this up, like, how should an agency think about managing this, in relation to a client, right? Should they be walking through this with their client? Do you think an agency could do it themselves? Kind of, what would you recommend?
Great question. So majority of our agencies that we work with, because we have a whole onboarding process, we work with agencies on how to, build workflows and pricing and all this other stuff too, and how to do an opt-in versus opt-out approach, which we'll get into here in a bit. But majority of our agencies build the policies for their clients and then present that policy to them for approval, because you want it to be a part of your workflow. You want it to be a part of the streamlined process for a site. Typically, it ends. The policies and implementation of consent typically happen towards the end of the, before going live with the website for most of our agencies. So that usually happens. And most of the time, you guys know the website and a client just as well, or if not more, than the technical side of building a policy, like, what vendors are you using, how do you guys handle and collect information? So they're going to be asking you questions. So majority of them, we help agencies do like bulk imports of websites, bulk policies and duplication of policies across it, because it's pretty similar. And then from there, they can customize the banner or maybe go into each individual policy to do that. So that's the most streamlined way. That's where most of our agencies do, depending on the volume of your clients, obviously that plays a part, but that's where we would recommend to start, utilize Termly as a service as much as we can. And then at that point, you're taking it on from an account manager or a CSM to kind of customize that policy from that point.
Yeah, got it. So what I hear you saying is, mostly an agency you think can manage this on behalf of the client themselves, and maybe there's a question or two that they need to get answered from the small business, but mostly it's like, cool, like you can set this up and even automate the setup if you really wanted to.
Absolutely. Yep. You can invite them to collaborate too within our platform. So there's a lot of options there, but in the end, most of our agencies just do it themselves and try to streamline it as part of a service. And there's a great, reselling opportunity and added benefit that we obviously try to position as part of that. And that's also an ongoing thing as well, because usually, as I mentioned before, 6 to 12 months, 12 months at a minimum, just to revisit the policy once a year. Consent is pretty automated. Once you install it, it's pretty automatic. We can set up scans to go every quarter, every month, every week if you want to. If new cookies are identified, they automatically get inserted into your cookie policy. So that's kind of almost like a set it and forget it type deal with very minimal work. So that's obviously a benefit to agencies because they have a technology platform that they don't have to worry about and manage very often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, great question. All right, so policies are pretty straightforward. I don't want to overcomplicate. I'm not going to go through all the questions, but that's pretty straightforward. Sorry, I got a dog in the background. So in the end, that's pretty much the platform itself. The one last thing I'll mention is that we do have a DSAR form, and just really quickly, because we'll go into that in a little bit. Data subject access request forms are a form that can live on your website that allows consumers, which is a requirement for most regulations, to obtain their information that's being tracked or to delete their information is being tracked. So in the end, this form actually helps our customers a lot because it really requires individuals that are serious about it to fill out this form, to provide this information, and then submit this request. And it really just weeds out like these random people trying to just create more work for businesses. And so we're actually expanding this functionality. It's another step towards compliance where you can actually manage these requests within our platform. Right now, it's just an embedded form, but it does minimize the amount of actual requests and validated requests that you get. It can help streamline the process. And again, this is something that is a requirement where there is a point of contact, right? A way for a consumer to reach out, to access or delete. And that happens all the time. Termly himself, we get 50 a month or so, like serious requests. So as regulations continue to grow, again, it's on the business to be able to handle these requests directly.
Right.
All right. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here, and we'll switch back to the presentation. Let's see. All right, perfect. That was smooth. All right, so just a quick overview of the two platforms. Consent management, again, we're Google certified, AAB TCF certified. We continue to work with Google directly to make sure that we're up to speed. We do have Google consent modes integrated. We have GTM integration, Duda integration. We have plenty of platforms. We do have a WordPress plugin too as well. And at the end of the day, we try to service as many platforms as we possibly can. And again, it includes everything that you see there. And I can't emphasize enough how much we support agencies and have bulk duplication, bulk management of sites, many different features that allows to make the streamline of managing multiple sites pretty straightforward and easy. From a policy perspective, we have 8 legal policies right now. We have actually about 3 or 4 more in the mix for this year, if not more, if we can squeeze it in. But we continue to expand our legal policy repertoire. And again, they're targeted to making sure you're compliant for these laws around the world, and you have different ways to embed policies. And then at the end of the day, we are always up to date. We always notify you via email, in-app, try to communicate these regulatory updates, and we'll let you know when things need to change. Most of the time, it's just really education. But when things do change, then we let you know and try to help you walk you through these changes to make it as simple as possible.
How frequently do like the privacy policies change, right? Like I know you guys will try and obviously automate it if possible, or if there's more data, that's when you kind of ask for it.
Yeah.
Like, is this a monthly thing? Is it a yearly thing? Like what do you guys see?
It's a yearly thing, I would say. I mean, just in real life or real data was last year was twice that we had it.
Right.
And so we had a regulatory update within the US that we needed to change for CCPA. And then some of these may not apply. Like, for example, like there was a Switzerland law that came into place. And if you wanted to be able to have that within your privacy policy, then you could go in and add Switzerland as part of your policy. So some of these may apply, some of them may not. But we had 2 sort of major updates to our privacy policy. And, the majority of our customers opted into that, but there are some that didn't require a sort of change to go back in the platform. So it's really up to your business and where you target. But I wouldn't be freaked out. Most of these are just updates. And like I mentioned before, a lot of these updates are following existing laws. So you're already covered, even with these news laws coming up. And that's important to know.
Yeah.
Yep. Great question. All right. So let's talk about the value proposition. So you guys as an agency are at this point looking at to implement privacy in some way, shape, or form to your clients. And we'll talk about sort of how you position Termly, how you position privacy as part of your added benefits to your clients. And we'll also look at sort of like the opt-in or opt-out approach, and a few other things about trying to answer as many questions on how you could essentially roll this in to your agency and offer to your customers. So, let's talk about like the first one, which is legal compliance and assurance. I think that's the biggest one and at the forefront. We walk through the fines. You guys get it. At the end of the day, it is the business's responsibility to implement privacy. And because you guys are directly tied with these businesses and offering the digital solution that tracks customers that do these things, we see this all the time. We have people that got approached by ambulance chasers, and they're the ones that are trying to find websites with gaps and then sue them and try to find like $2,000 or $3,000, whatever it is. And we come across it all the time, and they come to us. And typically our agencies are the first people that get contacted because they're like, what's going on? And then the agencies reach out to us and saying, okay, can you let me know what happened, or what can we do about this? And so again, as part of that digital solution, you're reducing risk and disputes and fines. I mean, the ambulance chaser will come across and they will completely ignore sites that have consent management and done right. There are just banners that do nothing, and those are the ones you don't want. But as long as it's tracking and blocking cookies, they will actually go and inspect the elements and do things within the back end of the site to see if scripts are being triggered. I mean, they're that minute to try to identify sites that have a liability, but they just skip over the ones that actually have a good solution in place because they're just looking for low-hanging fruit. So it's a great way to avoid these disputes, avoid reputation hits, and really it's about time and lawyer fees, right? Because that's going to be a pain in the butt for agencies to deal with when they're trying to run their business. And obviously they're looking to you guys to offer that solution. And then, the latest compliance and data. So like part of the service we offer is that, look, you're relying on Termly to provide guidance, right? Instead of you taking on that responsibility. So the constant education that we put out, the ongoing resources that we provide agencies to educate their customers, those are all a part of the service we provide. And again, that's a huge reason to as a benefit to pass on to your clients, that you are now going to be able to help them navigate this, and that level of trust just starts to increase. All right, so let's talk about time and resources. So I talked about this a little bit, but as I mentioned before, the consent management, sort of a set it and forget it type of platform, saves a ton of time, but it has a lot of value. So there's a little bit of upfront management to get the banner up and running as we walk through a little bit. But in the end, it's pretty automated and just has a high value and a high value perception. So that's a great benefit on both ends for an agency. Low engagement to set things up, but high value to the customers to do so. Updating policies is really straightforward. It's very hard to engage lawyers to do that because then you have to engage with them $300 an hour, all these other too. Plus, you also have to know what the law is. And that can be difficult to try to give direction. So in the end, there's a lot of time saved there. And then the whole point here, and we emphasize this in our agency a lot, is that we're trying to take as much off of your plate so that you can concentrate on running your own business. And that's most of the things that agencies do to try to streamline services. That's why they try to kind of be all-in-one services, or even if you're focused on just websites, there's a lot that goes to that, right? So in the end, trying to re-emphasize to your clients that you don't have to worry about this. We got it. We understand it. We have a trusted partner. In the end, we'll make sure this happens. Then they're just like, yes, please take care of this for me. Because it is overwhelming at first when you start to think about privacy. It is something that somebody needs to know, but they don't necessarily want to invest the time to be able to do it correctly. All right. So, and I talk about this too, the enhanced trust. So at the end of the day, the customized branding and options that you have within our platform just gives a seamless experience. And I think I want to focus more on that than anything. I've already talked about the enhanced trust that comes with offering privacy, how it's the new normal. But think about this. You have an individual that comes into your site and they have the seamless experience to also opt in and opt out of consent. They look at privacy policies, they do this, they feel trusted on the site. Well, that's only going to increase conversions. That's only going to increase the amount of individuals that start to interact with the website to ultimately generate a lead or whatever it is. And some agencies are focused on that. And so at the end of the day, creating that seamless experience, being able to have a privacy solution that's a part of the website, and then have that transparency, just again builds that trust, which ultimately leads to higher conversions and everything too as well. We're actually working on a few case studies with some of our agencies that they have come to us saying that that's helped a lot, especially on the trust factor. So love to share with you guys when they're available on our site. And but again, at the end of the day, it's all about building a trust experience on the site for an individual. You only have 3 seconds to impress somebody, so let's make that as best as possible. And I think consent is a part of that too, for sure. All right. Okay, so selling tips. Let's get into the nitty gritty, right? So if you're an agency, you have this on. What approach do you take in order to sell this service to your clients, right? This is where I want to focus on a little bit. So I think the number one thing that we always get and we always talk about is the opt-in versus the opt-out approach. And we really talk about this a lot. And the natural evolution of things, when we first started, we always took sort of an opt-in approach. Agencies were like, okay, I'll offer this to my customers. I'll see what I can. I'll try to, package this, send educational information, all these other things to do that. And it's successful to a certain degree. But what ends up happening over time is that agencies will just migrate towards an opt-out approach, because the opt-out approach is essentially, we're going to provide this service to all of our customers as an added benefit. And in the end, we have consistency across all of our clients. We have this method of being able to build this within our workflows to streamline that process. So it just makes it super simple. Instead of saying, oh, does this client have it? Does this client have it? Then you have to, educate your sales team. You have to implement different sales tactics. You have to increase invoices on renewal. You have to do all these different things for the opt-in, where opt-out ends up being a lot more simple. And especially as the low cost of implementation, depending on the volume you have, it could be, very cheap in order to do that, where the added value and benefits to adding compliance is so high that it essentially offsets the low cost that you would implement this for your clients anyways. And eventually those clients are going to be asking for it if they're not doing now, because they're going to come across this issue. So again, this comes back to this proactive approach of agencies taking this opt-out approach versus the opt-in. We have agencies that do both, don't get me wrong, but majority of them are in the opt-out approach. And I'll kind of talk about a little bit more of a few methods that we can do to support the opt-out that actually gets higher participation, which as a reseller, you could potentially be making more revenue. You could be making a lot more streamlined process. And I promise you, your CSMs and account managers will love you because of that, because the consistency is a lot better than trying to figure out contracts and who has this or who has not. So, but yeah, these are the two differences. I think both of them work. I think it's always a use case. But again, at the end of the day, if you kind of have a little more foresight in the future, the opt-out approach is definitely the more streamlined way to go, and a lot easier to implement on day one than would be sort of a migration over time. All right, moving on. So let's talk about packaging. So a lot of our agencies package that. Number one is hosting. They just put it into the kind of the hosting package that they offer, whether that's an ongoing maintenance package or whether that's part of their first initial sale. They just build it in. Privacy, compliance, security, that kind of rings true too as well. The website build itself, essentially this is the entire package we have to build a website, which includes X, Y, and Z in privacy. So bundling helps a lot. I think in the end, it can just be able to sort of see the value and added benefit. It can bring more benefits to the packages that you already have, where the price point can be higher and you're adding compliance with that. We also see accessibility too. So accessibility is big. I think in the end, there are requirements and laws that are required by website providers to be able to be accessible to that audience. It is a huge audience segment that's untapped most of the time too as well. And so we also see accessibility and privacy bundled together, and that could be very useful if you guys do that. There's a lot of synergy there too as well. Most of the technologies are similar too. There's a script that you place on there and it gives accessibility and changes the site. So there's a lot of synergy there too as well. So packaging is a useful tool. It's something that we encourage to as well. But again, if you're looking at selling it individually, this is where packaging leans more towards the opt-out approach rather than the opt-in approach, because again, if you're trying to sell it individually, then there's packaging can be a little more difficult. But in the end, all of these are viable solutions, and we see this all the time with our agencies. All right, let's see here, and then the last one, the resources. So our agency partners, we have a ton of resources. We worked with Duda to create some custom materials, things too as well. It's fantastic. So anything from value proposition documents for consent and for policies, inserts into invoices, We have a really good resource for the opt-out reports, which is actually like an opt-out contract confirming that they're opting out. And when they have to sign that document and have to say, okay, I'm not opting into this service, and the language that's in it, it really gets them to think about why they're opting out of this. It's not necessarily now a price thing. It's more so, okay, do I really need this? And it makes it really easy for your sales reps or owners or whoever's talking with the client to say, you kind of do need this. And I would recommend not opting out if that's the case. And so using that as leverage point is part of your thing, but giving your clients the option to do so definitely has the most adoption. It streamlines that process. And that's a great resource to do that. And we can definitely share that information with you guys too as well. So
Awesome.
articles on our website is a big one. Education is big. So I think that we have a huge resource on our site that can look at different laws across the world to understand them and how it applies, the requirements. We have like interactive maps that can give you a sense of where regulations are in the US. And so a lot of resources there too as well. And we also repurpose some of these articles and things for our agencies to distribute that content in newsletters, whatever they do to reach out to their customers. It is Privacy Month right now for us, and Privacy Day is on the 28th coming up here. So it is super relevant. Is one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar this month. So again, there's a lot of adoption, there's a lot of attention to privacy. And so that's a great time to sort of promote that and create sort of a campaign around that too as well.
Yeah.
All right. So that's it for me. Questions for sure. I'll pass it over to you, Russ. So go ahead.
Yeah, let me jump right in, kind of just going right off the back of the packaging and kind of positioning side. When you think about selling, Termly or any kind of consent solution, do you try and focus a little more on the scare tactics of like, hey, you can get hit with these fines, or do you say, great, like privacy is really the right thing to do, no matter whether you have to do it or not? Like, how should, if I were approaching, a customer about using this, how would you recommend kind of positioning that, or is it both, or what is it?
Yeah, it's definitely both. I'm not a fan of scare tactics. I don't think we do fear, play fear into, forcing somebody to buy something, right? That tends to be the wrong approach. But I think we always start with the requirements that a business is, and educating that business into, this is what you need. This is something that's real. Fines play a part of that for sure. The slide that I have is a good resource. So it shows like, this is not just, Amazon's problem. This is your problem too. And once they understand that, and you take that education to a sort of approach, then it's like, okay, these added benefits, these things that come with it are all sort of like icing on the cake, if that makes any sense. So I would definitely take that approach when talking with them, saying that, hey, this is a requirement for you guys. We're taking on that responsibility for you to help, or this is something we recommend you doing. And these are the reasons why. And at the end of the day, they will see that. They'll also see sort of the offset of cost to benefit ratio too as well. And then they'll eventually come to the conclusion that it's totally worth it, whatever they're paying. So yeah, great question.
So I want to jump in, or there's one question from Trevor a little bit earlier here, asking how far should a business consider an area of coverage, considering visitors in the US? We had states with privacy laws, or even other countries, Canada, Brazil, whatever it might be.
Yeah, you look at regions, right? So like North America for sure. So like if you're in the US, I would consider Canada, Mexico. You could look at South America, but that's probably pretty far to kind of consider. We get traffic from India, and there's an India privacy law. So we have to consider that for visitors there too as well. But there are stipulations within these regulations about customers and visitors, and there are also certain thresholds. But my take and our recommendations always is like, look at the most stringent regulation. GDPR is very stringent. US has got some states like CCPA that's extremely stringent. So if you follow those guidelines, then anything that falls under that is going to be covered. So I would say, look at your region, look at where the majority of your users are. That's for sure where you need to be covered. And most of the time when you're doing that stringent law, you're also covered with anybody that's coming overseas too as well, to make sure that you have that privacy policy, that consent platform in place. So, and even in UK, EU, like you're talking the entire region as well. And luckily, GDPR is something that covers everybody. And you probably have to consider the Germany law a little bit and see what the regulation is there, but they are pretty similar to GDPR.
Yeah, got it. Cool. Thanks. Are there any kind of like limits or boundaries of where like Termly doesn't touch on the privacy side? Like, are there maybe it's like practices that the small business does physically that
Mhm,
they might maybe they like ask for the email address in person from someone that obviously is not really a digital thing.
mhm.
Like, are there boundaries that of that kind of you know agencies should maybe think about?
Yeah, for sure. Agencies, you're only going to do so much for the business too, right? So like
Right.
you can't run their business, but and again, the emphasis is on the business to implement these practices, obviously with your help. So, but I think the biggest one to mention is that DSAR. I mentioned it before. That is the emphasis on the business to respond. So when
Mhm.
somebody responds via the digital platform, say on your site using the DSAR form, then it's up for the business to respond in a timely manner. Usually it's 30 to 60 days. You have to gather that information within your platforms that you're using, whether it's like a HubSpot CRM or something like that, and then provide that information to the client, or even eventually delete that information on those platforms. So there is a portion of the privacy responsibilities that land on the business that sort of termly doesn't cover because the business needs to do it themselves. But again, we try to make that management as simple as possible.
Mhm.
We kind of shy away from saying, okay, we'll cover you 80% or 75% because everybody's different. Like if it's a small two-person shop, you're not going to get probably DSAR requests or much traffic, but we work with businesses that get millions of site visits a month. And, that's a very different sort of responsibility where you start getting into internal structure of talking about privacy, how you collect email addresses, how you manage and delete those email addresses. So again, that's kind of out of our purview. But in the end, there is most of the coverage and most of the liability is covered within the solutions that we provide. And
Mhm.
that's a great start in your compliance journey as you
Yeah.
continue to grow as a business.
Yeah. Absolutely. So one thing I want to, I kind of a weird question, but it's on my mind. Termly has a free plan that's available to kind of get in there, use the
Yeah.
product. When do you see people upgrading most frequently? Like, what are those kind of like triggers that get
Mhm.
people to move up? And how should an agency think about am I going just with the free plan to try it out, or do I really need
Yeah.
something paid, or like how does that kind of work?
Yeah, our free plan is sort of full featured when it comes to policies. We're not limiting like the liability of policies right now. It's like if you create a privacy policy, then it's going to be covered and it's going to address those laws. But we do have limits, right? You can create one domain, that's great.
Right.
You have edits that become a sort of a gateway into sort of a pro plus plan. um, Additional policies. So typically terms and conditions and a privacy policy is mostly required for these different
Mhm.
platforms, like I mentioned. So when you start to get multiple policies, that's when it makes more sense to go into a paid plan. And then from the consent side, we limit the amount of traffic to these paid plans. So it's really just servicing smaller sites in the sense to get started and understand what compliance is. Over time, people just upgrade to the Pro Plus plan. There's branding associated with it,
Yeah.
especially if you're servicing a client. We do have the Termly logo on there.
Right.
If you're just using the free plan. So in the end, we want to start your compliance journey. But typically, when you're working with agencies or working with multiple clients, multiple scenarios, different verticals, and so it's pretty quickly that they transition to a Pro Plus plan, and then that's where you can work out, with Duda, like bulk plans, things like this, as well as taking advantage of bulk imports, bulk policies and duplication, so you can edit, streamlining the onboarding process. That's where we start to tend to say, hey, it's not even worth to screw around with the free plan. Let's start getting after this and sort of how we implement this into our agency.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So it's yeah, okay. Like it's just a great way to kind of get started, right? Like and like
Yeah.
how would you recommend an agency go and learn more, right? Would you recommend they go right to the product? Would you recommend they
Hmm.
go and read some of like the assets and resources that you referenced during your presentation? Where would
Yeah.
you point people to?
Yeah, I think getting started on our platform is super easy, right? So just start fooling around with it. Look what sort of embedding options, how that technology integrates. Doing that, we give a lot of people just try it out to get that going. But then in addition to that, articles on our site, as I mentioned, is a huge resource to be able to understand the regulation in your region. Just the articles are quick reads, really simple and easy to understand. So I think that portion of it to try to position it best. And then yeah, feel free to reach out to us too. We have a full compliance
Mhm.
department. We have a legal team that can help answer questions. Myself and my team and the marketing side can really help with seeing how that sort of fits in the agency and how you position it. So there's a lot of information on our site that I would recommend to start with. Go ahead and set up a free account, see how that works within your site. And then from there, we can have a more detailed conversation for sure.
Great. Well, Raffaele, we're running out of time here. We're right at the end of the hour. So I really appreciate you coming in, and I'm excited to see a lot of our Duda customers get their hands on and get dirty and kind of really start this compliance journey.
We are too.
We're all going to be going through over the next several years. But
For sure.
Duda deals with it, and every company deals with it. So
for sure, it's an evolution, right? So I really appreciate the time, Russ. So it's been a great relationship so far, and we're looking forward to the future. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Hans, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.